Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ballhawk Sports Podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm excited for this week's episode. We have the NFL QB carousel. Now, some things I want to get out of the way before I get into the actual movement that has happened. The QB position is an incredibly wonderful and entertaining topic to get to tackle. So I'm looking forward very much to being able to give my opinion on this. But starting off, there's a lot of guys that we know that aren't going to be talked about here. Those are the definite starters, those are the guys 100%. They didn't change teams, they didn't do anything. They're their quarterbacks. That's Jalen Hurts with the Eagles, Pat Mahomes on the Chiefs. You got Josh Allen, who just signed his contract extension with the Bills. You have newly drafted players like Drake May on the Patriots. You have Caleb Williams on the Bears, with Ben Johnson as his new head coach. You have Jaden Daniels on the Commanders. You have Tua Tagovailoa down in Miami. You have Trevor Lawrence coming off of his injury-riddled season last year down in Jacksonville. You have C.J. Stroud out in Houston for the Texans. You have Dak Prescott coming off his injury in Dallas. You have the 49ers with Purdy. He's rumored to be also getting extended. You have the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, the Cardinals with Kyler Murray, the Broncos with Bo Nix, the Packers with Jordan Love. You also have the Chargers. They have Herbert. You have the Falcons. They have Penix. The Panthers have Bryce Young. The Vikings, more likely than not, is going to have J.J. McCarthy. As the report came out that they are out on Aaron Rodgers. The Lions have Jared Goff. The Bengals have they have Joe Burrow. And then what we're going to start off with is a team that did keep their quarterback, and that is the LA Rams. Now, the Rams and Matt Stafford had a little bit of some problems coming into the season. Now, Stafford was allowed to seek a trade after contract discussions had hit a little bit of a bypass. He went around, supposedly the Giants and the Raiders and a couple other teams also put in bids and contract offers to Stafford. He eventually chose to stay in LA with the reworked contract. And the Rams also re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo to a 1-year, $4.5 million contract. Now, the thing to note about this deal is it has a max value of $13.5 million, likely tied to performance-based incentives, whether that be, games played, downs played, yardage, whatever it is. Basically, as we'll get into later when we get to the injury insurance players, he is one of these where if Stafford gets hurt, Garoppolo comes in and he can end up earning more money because he got more playing time than the backup role, which would just get him $4.5 million. But staying in the NFC West, we have the Seattle Seahawks made some big changes at quarterback, taking Geno Smith and trading him to the Raiders. The Raiders then signed him to a 2-year extension worth a max of $85.5 million, 66.5 of which is guaranteed. This is important for the Raiders as they're re-pairing Pete Carroll with Geno Smith. Pete Carroll had Geno Smith's best season as a starter in one of his last years in Seattle in 22. So they'll probably be able to get some good things together. Geno Smith will know what is needed of him out of the playbook and out of the offense, and as a leader as well, as he's familiar with Pete Carroll. And if you listen to the presser, it was a lot about how Pete Carroll puts his team together, how he puts his players in a good position to win, and that Geno Smith expects more of that. But Seattle wasn't done there at quarterback. They decided to sign Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $105 million deal as a free agent. This is important. Sam Darnold moves to another defensive coach after thriving last year with an offensive head coach. So it really will be on the Seattle offensive coordinator to be able to maximize Darnold and put him in the best position to succeed. I am someone who believes that Sam Darnold has limitations. I think that the last 2 games of this season proved that and showed that he is not a top quarterback talent, but he has the ability to be a top quarterback. Now, I will say the weapons that Seattle have are good. Cooper Kupp, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Noah Fant, Kenneth Walker, um, Charbonnet as well out of the backfield. They have some good weapons there on offense, so he's not returning to the Jets that had no one when he got there. So he should be in a good spot. I don't expect him to perform as well as he did last year, but I do expect good things out of Sam Darnold, and I think that Seattle's a really good team, so maybe he can get back to the playoffs and possibly redeem himself. But I'm not someone who would vouch for Sam Darnold getting this kind of money unless the draft was what it was. So I understand it. Sam Darnold, most of his money is this year. Next year, I believe there's only like 20 something million guaranteed, and the third year there's nothing guaranteed. So they can save like 10 to 15 million if they cut him before his roster bonus is due, which will be in the beginning of the league year next year. They will carry a dead cap hit of like 25, 27 million, something like that. But not the end of the world if they do need to cut ties with him next year. But more likely, I believe, if they do end up having to split, it'll be in 2 years after the 2026 season and the 2027 offseason. But moving cross country to the New York Jets, they signed Justin Fields to a 2-year, $40 million deal, and they have come out and publicly said they are committed to him as their starting quarterback. This is really important to me. I think Justin Fields needs this. I think that he should have had this last year in Pittsburgh. I think the Steelers did him a real disservice. And honestly, as a person, I understand why Fields wouldn't want to go back to Pittsburgh, despite the fact that they might look better in the situation right now. But, just because they have DK Metcalf and they have George Pickens and they have Pete Freiermuth, they did him wrong personally. He started I believe it was their first 4 to 6 games, and then he got benched, not because he was playing bad, just because they thought Wilson could do better. It had nothing to do with performance. It had to do with perceived potential, which if I'm a guy, like I'm a person, and I get passed over for a promotion or just a job, and then I get told it's because we think that they might be able to do better than you could do, despite the fact that you are doing a good job with the job, like in the interim. You took over the role, and you've been doing it well, but we think this other person might be able to do it better. And then at the end of the season, you don't get to where you want to be, or at the end of the year, you don't get to where you want to be, and then they come up to you and they say, hey, I know the other guy didn't work out the way we wanted to, but we would love to have you back in that role. I don't know if I would trust that won't happen again. I don't know if I would trust that, the NFL is an ever-changing landscape. There was no commitment last year when they could have given it to Fields, the Steelers. So I wouldn't have expected them to do it again. Maybe they draft someone to replace him. Maybe they signed Mason Rudolph, who they have liked historically in that building. So I get it. I think the Jets are a good fit for him. They have some weapons on offense. Tyler Conklin's a decent tight end. Garrett Wilson's a good receiver. Breece Hall's a great back. They have an okay offensive line. They have some work to do, but they have talent there, and Justin Fields obviously can do a lot of things with his legs. He's not just his arm. So I think that's a good fit. And it'll be nice to see Justin Fields be able to settle into being a starting quarterback again, hopefully, as they've publicly stated, and then hopefully be successful. I wish the best for him and any quarterback out there. But moving on to the Indianapolis Colts, they signed Daniel Jones to a 1-year, $14 million contract. This deal is strictly to compete with Anthony Richardson. And I believe to push Anthony Richardson, I think they chose a really good player who will, probably push Richardson to be better and to perform better and give him some pressure while not fully being someone who's like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to steal that job and he ain't getting it back. I don't think Jones is that talented. I think he's at best a replacement level quarterback. So they could go with Jones and they can be safe and they can hope to ride Taylor, the whole year and play some good defense, which is a long shot. But I think that he's there to push Richardson, and then eventually be the backup, which is how it should be. But he is getting more than a typical backup would, obviously, because he's there to compete. But finishing off with the starters that were acquired at quarterback so far this offseason, we have my New York Giants. They signed Jameis Winston to a 2-year, $8 million deal, and then a few days later, they signed Russell Wilson to a 1-year, $10.5 million deal. Now, people are saying that because of the money difference, that means that Wilson's going to be the starter and Winston will be the backup. I truly do think it is going to be a go to camp and compete for it. I think the money has more to do with what the market value for the players were. A 2-year, $8 million deal is a good job, but it is more of a backup type deal, terms wise. I mean, as I'll get to later, but a couple other players signed backup deals in that, realm. But, 10.5 is not the 14 that Daniel Jones got. It's not the 20 that Justin Fields got. So it's not exactly starter money either. And at the end of the day, if you look at it and say, okay, we have roughly $15 million into the quarterback position, that's not a lot. And, for the chance that Russell Wilson could beat out Jameis Winston and deliver something, I think that was worth the money, especially for a GM and a head coach that were given a playoff mandate. Basically, I don't know if he's actually come out and said it, but essentially the head coach and the GM, if they want to keep their jobs after next season, they need to make the playoffs or at least come close to it and show improvement. And I think that plays into their decision to sign 2 vets. And then just on a minor note with the Giants, they also brought back Tommy DeVito on a 1-year deal. He was an exclusive rights free agent, so he probably wasn't going anywhere anyway, but he is looking at least the 3rd string job. I think it would be hard pressed for him to beat out the 2 vets, Wilson and Winston. But you never know. Crazy things have happened. But now let's move on to the very interesting backup carousel that's been happening. There was a lot of roundabouts, and really it all starts with Josh Dobbs signing a 2-year, $8 million deal with the Patriots. Good, solid quarterback, kind of similar to the makeup of Drake May. Also very cerebral player. I believe that he studied like astrophysicist or something like that. Like he's a very smart guy. He's had some success as a quarterback. He's been around. I think a good guy for Drake May to have behind him. But that deal being signed allowed the Patriots to then go and look for a trade partner for Joe Milton. And they were actually able to find one with an upgrade to the pick that they took him at. So they took Joe Milton last year in the 6th round, and they sent Milton and a 7th this year to the Dallas Cowboys for a 5th round pick. Now, Milton played in the last week of the season. He didn't start, but he did play a majority of the game, and he looked pretty good. He had I think it was 214 yards passing. He had a rushing touchdown. He looked good. He is a decently mobile guy. He's got a cannon for an arm, a little bit of inaccuracy, a little raw as well. He's a guy that's going to benefit from being able to sit behind Dak Prescott, learn from him, and maybe get a shot at going somewhere else. Again, like the Cowboys trade him, or just being able to take over Prescott if he gets hurt again, God forbid. So that's really interesting. I was not thinking that the Cowboys would be the one to trade for Milton. I thought a team like the Saints that are very money strapped and could use a young quarterback prospect like that could do it. I thought that a team like the Steelers could do it just to take a wild shot. Or a team like the Raiders or the Rams who could develop him behind their current starters. They might do that too, but the Cowboys end up getting it done. I believe the sentiment was that the Patriots weren't expected to even be able to get much better than a sixth. They needed to throw that seventh in there to get Dallas to go to the fifth, but they did get the fifth, so asset upgrades, always a good thing to see. But moving on to the Denver Broncos, they signed Sam Ehlinger and Jarrett Stidham. Now, Stidham got a 2-year, $12 million contract. So what that would basically say is that Stidham's going to be the number 2 behind Nix. Ehlinger will be the 3 or the practice squad guy, the emergency quarterback. But I like, and Stidham's played well. He knows the system in Denver, so that's not a surprise. And I think Sam Ehlinger fits what the type of quarterback that Sean Payton likes. So I think that's a good fit for them too. But behind Pat Mahomes, they will have a new backup as they signed Gardner Minshew and Bailey Zappi to 1-year deals. I really expect Minshew to be the number 2, Zappi to be the number 3 emergency quarterback. Minshew's a good locker room guy to have. He's a tough guy. He fought through a lot to get the job in Jacksonville, and then in Indianapolis, and then in Vegas as well. Unfortunately hasn't been very successful since his early Jacksonville days, but he is a grinder, and that's always good to have in the locker room. But another team that went with 2 guys to possibly be the backups is the LA Chargers. They signed Taylor Heineke and Trey Lance to 1-year deals. Now, Lance did get $6.2 million. So while it is expected for them to have just a normal battle for the second spot, I wouldn't be surprised if Lance is the one that sticks. Now, the $6.2 million probably does reflect the fact that he was getting offers from other people, whereas I don't know if Heineke was getting real interest around the league. But Trey Lance, there's probably coaches out there, and Harbaugh, I'm sure, is one of them, that look at Trey Lance and go, I can fix that. I can get in there and fix that, similar to Sam Darnold, similar to Baker Mayfield. I don't love the fit for Trey Lance here. Now, as a player, him and Herbert kind of stack up pretty well. Lance is a better runner, and obviously Herbert's a lot more accurate. But I would have liked to have seen Lance go somewhere with a more established offensive coach who develops quarterbacks. LA, Minnesota, Cleveland. I think those would have been better fits. I don't think $6.2 million was available at those teams, which is probably why he ends up in LA, which is not a bad situation for him. But I think that there are better places that he could have gone to learn if he's potentially looking and saying, okay, well, I'm going to be a backup this year in 2025, but in 2026, I might be able to get a shot to battle for a starting job. But we'll see what happens. It's on Lance and Harbaugh and the offensive staff over there in LA to be able to continue Lance's development, or just go with Heineke and say Lance isn't good enough. But moving on to our next guy, this was a re-signing by the Commanders, pretty much a done deal. Marcus Mariota signing a 1-year, $8 million contract. I know that he's getting this much money because he's the ultimate team player. Everyone that talks about him, very positive things to say about his locker room presence and how he is just as a person. But I am interested. I think that because he had to sign for $8 million, that there was interest elsewhere. I wonder if there was interest in him as a starter or as a potential, battle it out kind of guy. I wonder if Cleveland put in a bid. I wonder if Minnesota put in a bid. I wonder if Pittsburgh put in a bid. I don't know. But Marcus Mariota back to Washington to be Jayden Daniels' backup and mentor for another season. But another team that has a new backup is the Bears, as they signed Case Keenum to a 1-year, $3 million deal. He will battle with incumbent Tyson Bagent for the second job. I assume it'll be a straight battle. I couldn't really pick a favorite. I mean, maybe the vet and Keenum's able to, show his worth in the position room as well as on the field enough to be like, okay, well, we want Keenum in the building, and Bagent will go practice squad, third quarterback, emergency quarterback route. But another team having a backup quarterback battle is going to be the Detroit Lions, who signed Kyle Allen to a 1-year, $1.27 million deal. That's essentially vet min. I don't know exactly what the vet minimum is for a player like Allen, but he will battle with incumbents Hendon Hooker and Jake Fromm for the second spot. Now, I will say Hooker was the backup last year. Jake Fromm was the practice squad guy. So it would look like Allen's battling with Hooker and Jake Fromm is the long shot. But you never know what happens. Guys come out of nowhere. Fromm's a very smart player, a little bit limited in his arm talent, which is why he's been bouncing around the league a lot. But never know. Guys can do great things when they put their mind to it. But our last two of the backup signings that I want to get into right now are the Carolina Panthers re-signing Andy Dalton, 2 years, $8 million. Similar to, like I said, with the Jameis Winston contract. This is kind of the going rate for quarterbacks. 2 years is interesting because he is older, but I'm sure he's enjoying the comfy spot behind Bryce Young, and the possibility with Bryce Young possibly having some injury issues in the past, as well as some consistency and some production issues, that he might get some starts here and there. I'm sure that he likes it there in Carolina and is just good fit, and the money was there, and that's why that happened. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they re-signed Kyle Trask to a 1 year, $2.78 million contract. They like him as the backup. They like him behind Mayfield. I think Mayfield and Trask have a good relationship. I've read some stories about that. I would say that was also probably a foregone conclusion. Obviously, he didn't get too much. He didn't get a little either. He got more than Kyle Allen did. So I would think that that's a foregone conclusion. Maybe they end up drafting someone at the end that could push Trask, but I wouldn't count on it too much. But the other backups that I have 4 quarterbacks who were signed as injury insurance. That's the Jaguars signing Nick Mullins, to a 2 year, $6.5 million contract. The Cardinals signed Jacoby Brissett, 2 years, $12.5 million contract. Zach Wilson signs 1 year, $6 million with Miami. The 49ers signed Mac Jones, 2 years, $7 million with a max value of 11.5. The max value is similar to the Jimmy Garoppolo deal with the Rams. But all of these deals are injury insurance. The Jaguars getting Mullins. They have Lawrence, who had injury issues last year. The Cardinals getting Brissett. Murray's a smaller guy. He's had some injury issues in the past, so he's they paid decently well to have him as their backup there. Zach Wilson, Tua Tagovailoa's concussion issues are well documented. I won't get too much into it, but they give him good money as well to sign there in Miami. And then the Niners give Mac Jones a value-laden contract for 2 years, which is interesting. Interesting because Purdy potentially hitting free agency next year or getting tagged and then maybe traded. I'm not hearing anything on that, but we'll see. I think that the perceived number from Purdy's camp isn't where the Niners are going to come in at, so I think that there's a possibility that there's some very interesting options that end up coming out of this Mac Jones contract. But the other ones are just straightforward. They're there in case the other guys get hurt. But that's all for the injury insurance. The wild cards that we have left, there's 3 wild card teams. That is the Tennessee Titans, who signed Brandon Allen and Tim Boyle to 1 year deals. Those are backup contracts. Nothing really to think about there. But they have stated publicly that they are comfortable with Levis starting. And I would expect that they draft Cam Ward if they stay at number 1. If they trade out, because they've stated that they are comfortable with Levis at 1, maybe they go with someone later. I'll get into that in a little bit. But I would think that it's Ward at 1 or it's Levis as the quarterback there. But the Browns trade for Kenny Pickett, the backup quarterback from the Eagles last year, and they sent over Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th. Now, I would expect, because the Eagles haven't really signed anyone else, they will draft or they will run with Thompson-Robinson as the backup, and the Browns will use Pickett to battle either a rookie or Deshaun Watson coming back from injury. I do expect them to at least pretend that Pickett has a chance. But I also think that they will probably carry 3 quarterbacks into the season if Watson ends up being healthy, because they can't really let go of Watson. They owe him too much guaranteed money. But the last wild card that we have here is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who signed Mason Rudolph to a 2-year, $8 million contract. Now, very similar to the Winston deal and to the Andy Dalton deal. It's a backup deal, but they're big fans of Mason Rudolph down there in Pittsburgh. So it's always possible they run him out there. I think more likely you see Aaron Rodgers, who is still available in free agency, sign there. And then I also think that they end up drafting a quarterback in the first few rounds. But speaking of drafting quarterbacks, I want to get into the draft possibilities that face us in the next, 2.5 weeks that we have coming up here. So starting off the top of the draft, the Titans, I think if they take quarterback number 1, which I think they will do, they'll take a quarterback or they'll trade out. They will take Cam Ward at number 1. I think that he has very much spread himself out from the herd, rightfully so. He's a great option. He's the best there is this year. I will say, I think in a year where there is a more prominent number 1 prospect, there's no Myles Garrett's here in this draft, that they would just keep the first pick and they would take the generational player. But there isn't really a generational player outside of maybe you could say that Travis Hunter is, but a cornerback at number 1 is interesting to say the least. I don't know. I don't know about that. Even if he does play a little bit of receiver. So I think they take Cam Ward at number 1. If they do trade out of the first pick, they can take Jackson Dart in round 2 or the back end of round 1. They can trade back up or they take it. They could also go with Jalen Milroe and develop him behind Levis, give Levis a little bit of a shot, and then, if he isn't able to do it, they can run out Milroe back half of the season, and let his athleticism hopefully carry him, because I do think that he will end up in the second round because of that athleticism. But I do not think that the Titans are looking at Shedeur Sanders. I believe that the workout that they had scheduled was canceled mutually. So I think the Sanders camp understands that Titans aren't an option, and the Titans understand if it's quarterback, it's Cam Ward. But going on to Shedeur Sanders' most likely destination, that is the Cleveland Browns. They pick at number 2. Now, obviously, the easy option is just to take Sanders at 2. They could trade up to number 1. Rumors continue to swirl that the Browns and the team that I'm going to talk about next, the Giants, are willing to trade up to number 1, and they have been in constant contact with the Titans about what the value would be, what it would look like to do all that. If there is a trade for number 1, I would expect it to happen a lot closer to the draft than right now. I think there is a big enough gap between Ward and Sanders that I think very clearly you would want Ward over Sanders, but that is because of the potential of Ward, which would outweigh the floor of Sanders. I look at Shedeur Sanders and I see a lot of like a Mac Jones type of player, where I think what you saw in college is what you're going to get. That is basically, in my opinion, the best version of Shedeur Sanders that you have seen. A little bit of a limited, throwing the ball power-wise. His deep throws are accurate, but he doesn't have the strongest arm. He has some issues throwing short routes to the sidelines. All that wraps into throw power issues. I think that he has a little bit of a negative attitude. I don't think it's as profound as some media outlets are making it seem. I don't think that he's a bad guy. I think that he's just very competitive and he is unapologetically himself, which, I mean, if you've seen any videos of Deion Sanders, you know what his father was and is as a person. That's not a bad thing, but as a quarterback, you need to be more than that. You need to not be a distraction. You want to be, a Patrick Mahomes where you're always business. You don't want to be a Johnny Manziel where all your off-field stuff will always be what you're remembered for. You don't want that. Not to say that Sanders is Manziel, but in the extremes, and because we're talking about the Browns here, um, yeah, Sanders has limitations, whereas Ward has potential. And I think that statement right there shows you the difference in the two. But I also don't think that the Titans. It would have to be the Titans are really like, we don't want a quarterback this year. We don't want one of the top guys. We don't want Ward. We don't want Sanders. So we want out. We want to take Carter. We want to take Hunter. So Giants, Browns, have a duel. Have a duel. Go after it. Give us your best offers. Whoever has the best offers will get the first pick. Now, it's interesting because I really do think that if the Browns didn't have the Deshaun Watson situation, they would have signed one of the free agency quarterbacks, and they wouldn't even be thinking about quarterback here at 2. I really do think that they would just take Hunter or they would just take Carter and call it a day and move on with their lives. But I think because they have the Watson contract situation, they have to go cheap. That's why they acquired Kenny Pickett. That's why they haven't signed anyone else. And that's why they could potentially trade up for Ward or just take the consolation prize in Sanders. Not to say it's a bad thing. Kevin Stefanski is a good offensive coach. He can try to get the most out of Shedeur Sanders, but whether that's the direction they want to go in remains to be seen. If they do just not trade for number 1 and they stay at number 2, it's Hunter or Carter. And then similar to the Titans, they could trade back into the first round, or they have the first pick of the second round. They could take Jackson Dart there. That is one of the more interesting situations that could happen. I have a lot of teams potentially taking Jackson Dart in the second round or in the first round. I think that the way the order shakes up with the Browns, Giants, Titans being the 3 right there at the second round, that you could see a team like the teams that we'll notate later. That's the Steelers, Saints, Raiders, Rams, like all those teams that might want Dart, trading back into the first round to take Dart just so that they avoid needing to see if, whoever doesn't get a quarterback, because there's only 2 top guys for 3 teams. Whoever doesn't get a quarterback, they pick the top of the second. So, if the Browns pass on Sanders, they could take Dart at pick 33 at the top of the second round. So I think that's always a possibility that they might need to trade the pick 33 to get back into the first round to jump ahead of whoever might be trying to jump them. But I also think a very interesting option for them is Will Howard, the quarterback out of Ohio State. I always like the hometown or the college player staying in that atmosphere. He's also a prototypical guy. He's one of the taller quarterbacks, the more well-built quarterbacks, and he had a really good year. Now, he had some great talent at Ohio State, don't get me wrong, and Ryan Day has a great staff, and they have a great system there. So he was put in the best place to succeed. I will say Will Howard has the chance in Cleveland to be what like Dak Prescott was for the Cowboys when he was drafted. But I also think that Tyler Show is also an option for them. My problem with Show is that he's older. He's 26 years old. So really sitting on him to develop isn't really an option. But the Browns could take Show in the 3rd or 4th round. They could have him battle straight up with Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson if he's healthy and say, okay, who wins? Okay, great. Pickett won, so he'll get a couple starts. If he plays bad, okay, well, Show comes in, Watson comes in, whatever it is. So I think that Show and Howard are a good fit. Also, kind of similar profiles. Show is a little bit more polished. Part of that is because he's older, which means he's had more experience in the game. But I think they're both good fits in the middle, like round 3, 4 for the Browns if they don't take Ward or Sanders or Dart earlier. But moving on to the pick at number 3, it is the Giants. They could, like I said with the Browns, they could trade up for the first pick. I will say, after they signed Winston and after they signed Wilson as well, I don't expect them to want a quarterback. I expect them to stay at 3 and either take whoever's left of Hunter or Carter, because I do think that if Ward doesn't go 1, he goes 2. So I don't think it goes Carter, Hunter, Ward. Like I don't think that that's how it lines up. I think the Browns or the Titans will take Ward. It's looking like the Titans. But I think that if the Titans were to pass on Ward without trading it, the Browns will just scoop Ward up, and that'll be that. So the Giants will take whoever's left of the two. That's Carter or Hunter at number 3. But they could take Sanders if Ward's already taken. That is a possibility. I do believe that they have a draft workout scheduled, but I think that Ward is the one that could potentially, you could say, let's sit him. Sanders not really, especially if he's going to be a problem, like in the locker. Like he's going to come in there and be like, I'm the number 1 quarterback, and Wilson comes out, or they both come out and they show that they're better than Sanders. Well, if he's going to cause a ruckus about it, then why take him? So I think that they don't go quarterback in the first round at all. But I do really like them for Jackson Dart. I mean, it is my team, so I'm a little biased. So I would like them to take Dart personally. Let him develop for a year behind Winston and Wilson. I think those are 2 great vets for him to have. But I don't know if I want Dart if they have to trade back into the first to get him. Obviously getting that extra year of control, that 5th-year option, is always great to have for a quarterback. But for a guy that's probably going to need to develop a little bit in Dart, because I don't think Dart's ready to start. I do think that he has probably, with Ward up there in tools-wise, and you can project that he's going to be really good. And I think at Ole Miss, in Lane Kiffin's offense, that's going to translate at some level to the NFL. So I would love if they could take Dart in the second round. But if it's not him, they could always take Jalen Milroe as a complete project. I think of Milroe in a similar vein to Jalen Hurts, probably because they're both Bama quarterbacks. They're going to get drafted in the second round, even though Hurts went to Oklahoma and improved. But I think the big difference between Hurts and Milroe is that Hurts went somewhere where he had the ability to improve because of the offense that Lincoln Riley runs and the success that the quarterbacks there have had running that offense. I mean, you see Baker Mayfield came from them, Jalen Hurts came from them, Kalen Williams came from them in that offense. So it's really interesting what Milroe could do if he sits. I think that if you make him start, he is not accurate enough to start in an NFL game right now, today, this year. I don't think that he will be. I think he needs to sit and learn, and be able to learn to use his legs and athleticism as a tool, not as the only tool. And I think Jalen Milroe as a prospect right now is more of a running back at playing quarterback than a quarterback that can run. And I think that's a problem for any team expecting him to start. So taking Milroe in the second round, which is probably where I think he goes, that's interesting, especially if they're able to set up a situation where like someone trades up so that they can take Dart with their second round pick, with the Giants' second round pick, and they can fall back and then take Milroe. I think that'd be a really good situation for them, as long as they're expecting Milroe to sit. Now, I also will say that I like Curtis Rourke in the mid to late rounds as well, just because I can see a situation where they don't touch quarterback. With the playoff mandate that I said earlier about with the Giants head coach and GM being set forth by the owner, I could see them saying, we're gonna take a deep project in like a Curtis Rourke who has, he showed a lot of potential in his year at Indiana, but he's raw. He's prototypical. He's got the size that you'd want in a quarterback. He's got the arm strength for it, but he is raw in his accuracy and his ability to read the field and things like that. But I think he's a good option. Probably round 4 or 5 is where he ends up going, would be my guess. So he's a good option there if they don't take a guy earlier. But moving on to potentially until free agency fully is done doing its thing with Aaron Rodgers' situation, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do have them potentially taking Jackson Dart at 21, which is where they're slotted. Um, I don't see this as the most likely scenario. I think that they need a running back that they could take in round two. I also think that they're a good fit for if I think that they need to sign Rodgers. I think that allows them to do the more likely thing, and that is taking Jalen Milroe in round two and developing him. He profiles similarly athletically to Justin Fields. Now, obviously, Fields is more accurate, which is why he was drafted higher than Milroe will be. Um, but because of the interest that the Steelers had in bringing back Fields and having him in, I think that they want a very mobile quarterback. So I think Milroe fits very well with them in the second round. And then being able to sit behind Aaron Rodgers for a season and then start next year, I think is a great situation the Steelers could find themselves in. They just need to get Rodgers to sign on that dotted line, so that they know. Because if they go into the draft not having Rodgers and they only have Mason Rudolph and they're staring at pick 21 of being like, we could take Jackson Dart, he could challenge to start, we could take Jalen Milroe, he could need to sit. Those are big problems, and I do think that in that situation you could see them taking Tyler Show in like round 2 or 3, just because his advanced age means that he can't sit that long, theoretically. But I do think that Show could come in there, show out, have a good preseason, get a shot during the season if Rudolph can't do it. But I think that's more of an option if I think there's two lanes. There's the did Rodgers sign lane. There's the did Rodgers not sign lane. And I think the likely lane that they go down is that Aaron Rodgers is a Steeler, and then they draft Jalen Miller in the second round. That would be my guess as of right now. But you have the other options there available to you. But if they don't take Milroe, I expect them to take a quarterback. So a Rourke, a Will Howard, someone like that in the mid-late rounds would probably be likely to happen. I would be very surprised if they came out of the draft all 7 rounds and they didn't take a single quarterback. That would be surprising to me, even if they have Rodgers. But moving on to a team that is in a very interesting situation with the cap, that is the New Orleans Saints. Now, what they could do, they pick at 9. So I think the interesting thing about them is I think they are the likeliest spot for Sanders if he falls. So if Sanders doesn't go at 2, he doesn't go at 3. He's not going to go at 4 or 5 because that's the Jaguars and the Patriots. They have quarterbacks. So the next option is 6. Geno Smith just signed an extension to be the starter, and he got starter money. So I don't think Sanders fits there. I also think they take Gentry, but that's besides the point. So the next pick is 7. The Jets also just paid Justin Fields starter money. Now, not as much as Geno Smith got, but still got starter money. $20 million is not a small amount. And they have publicly came out and stood behind Fields, so I don't expect that to be an option either. I do think that is an interesting spot for a trade-up. If you do want to look into those type of situations, if you do go with the route of Shedeur Sanders falling. But that's not a conversation for right now. The Saints cap situation, which is where we find ourselves at, is that they can't cut Carr because most of his money would just become dead cap money, and they were already having cap issues before the season, or like last year, this year, they'll have it next year, I believe as well. And for a bad team, it's a bad situation to be in. So they need a cheap quarterback because they can't get rid of Carr and they can't really pay anyone to come in. So I think that they are a good option for Jackson Dart. I don't love the staff that's there in New Orleans being able to develop Dart, but I do like the idea of him sitting behind Carr for a year and then taking over next year. I do like that situation for Dart. I also think, although I think this is less likely, there is a landing spot for Jalen Milroe in the second round. Like I said, Milroe needs to sit, so similar to Dart, they could sit Milroe, start him next year. I don't think that lines up with the style of play that the Saints want. But crazier things have happened. I do think better fits for them are Dylan Gabriel, who's a little bit of an undersized option, or Taylor Show if they do decide that they want to push Carr this year. I think that Dylan Gabriel is similar in quarterback profile to a shorter Bo Nix, maybe like a Tua a little bit. So Dylan Gabriel's 5'11", which is shorter than you want for a quarterback. But he is accurate, and he sees the field decently well. I think that he finished his career with like the second most yards for a quarterback passing yards in college football history, and I believe he was tied with Case Keenum for the lead in touchdowns for a quarterback, passing touchdowns. So he's got the resume. I don't like Oregon quarterbacks coming out or receivers coming out because their offensive system tends to be very singular and simple compared to how NFL teams like to run it. That's a generalization that is, goes back to the Chip Kelly days and even before that. But it does tend to hold true. So I think Gabriel is going to be a little bit raw when it comes to like the film room and being able to see like the full progression of plays. So that for that reason, he's going in like the third-ish, maybe falls to the beginning of the fourth round. But I think that he's a good fit for the Saints. Drew Brees was an undersized quarterback that had a lot of success there. And the Broncos already have a quarterback, so I don't think that they take Gabriel, although that profiles very well for that kind of style. Gabriel's a West Coast style quarterback. So if that's what they want to do, then Gabriel's their guy. And I think that's the kind of offense the Saints would prefer to use. But moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders, I think that they take a quarterback that's a developmental project. I have the Rams next as the team to talk about. I think they're in a similar situation. But you also have the possibility, if Sanders falls, that he goes at 6. Like I talked about a little bit earlier, I don't think that Sanders goes at 6. I think that because the Raiders just paid Smith, they expect him to start. So if they take a quarterback, it will be later on. And it would be like a full Russell Wilson, Matt Flynn situation. Or Dak Prescott, Tony Romo situation where a rookie from the 3rd or 4th round just comes out of the gate flying and you immediately know, like, this is a guy, we have a guy. And I think for the Raiders, that guy could be Riley Leonard. A little bit raw, similar to other guys, but he has prototypical size. He has size similar to Will Howard and Curtis Rourke. In the fact that he's like 6'3", 6'4", strongly built. He's not the most mobile compared to some other quarterbacks, but good arm, decent accuracy. I don't love Notre Dame quarterbacks in general. I see them as not as challenged as some other guys were. One of the things that Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy had coming out last year was that everyone thought that he was a raw prospect, even though he showed a lot of talent at Michigan, took them to a championship, because he was never really challenged. And I see similarities with Riley Leonard and his tape. So that's where I stand with that. I think Riley Leonard would be a good option for them in like the 4th round to take a flyer on, possibly develop. They have the Tom Brady train out there rolling. And Pete Carroll has shown success with a mid-round quarterback in the past, so why not try it again? But the last team that I have here for draft possibilities at quarterback is obvious possibilities is the Rams. Now the Rams looking for a developmental player to build behind Garoppolo and behind Stafford. Personally, as like a fan of what McVay is doing out there in LA, I don't want. The report came out that Garoppolo is very well liked in LA. It would like break my heart to see an offensive mind like McVay not go with the developmental quarterback that could be had in this year's draft or in future drafts, depending on how long Stafford plays and when they want to take their shot at a guy. Just because he has shown the ability to turn guys around. I mean, Baker Mayfield went to LA after getting cut by Cleveland and then went to Tampa and rocked it. Like, his ability to understand plays, diagnose them, and diagnose his players. I mean, he's one of the best culture builders, him and Dan Campbell, and like team unifiers and like developmental coaches. He's one of the best coaches in the NFL. I mean, look at how young their defense is and how it just all came together towards the end of the season. Really good signs of a good coach. I really would like to see McVay get his hands on like a Quinn Ewers, Curtis Rourke, Will Howard, all prototypical style quarterbacks, good size, good arm strength, some accuracy issues, some other, like mental flaws, in like reading the field and stuff, and things that you need to be an NFL quarterback. They could all sit for a year, 2 years, 3 years even, and then come out when Stafford retires and then be the guy or be in the conversation for being the guy. But really with McVay, I wanna see what he can do with a young quarterback and getting it done. But that is all that I have for you guys on this episode. Thank you for taking the trip with me around this QB carousel. We will be back next week with some more NFL offseason, NFL draft talk. Please leave your comments down below. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will talk to you next week.